Awesome. Hi, this is Shonnie Lavender, the Conscious Moms Coach, and I am excited to be here with you today talking about our young children and challenges they may have with compromise and the challenges that we may have as their parents when they are feeling challenged to compromise. And specifically, I am talking about this topic today because in my Facebook group, the Conscious Mom Circle, this question was brought up about compromise. And so I'm going to give you a little bit of background on this particular question and what this parent was wanting to get some feedback and support around. And then I'll go into what I'm going to talk about. So here's the situation as this mom described it. So she was talking about her daughter, who is her second child, and she's 5, and she has an older brother by a couple of years. And this family, I know them personally, and they're very conscious and mindful. Now, that doesn't mean they're perfect, because there's no such thing. Now, we all know that. And yet I do know that they do put a lot of intentionality into their relationships with their children, with each other as parents. And so that's sort of their family. And the mom talked about that her daughter, the younger, is pretty determined. She has a good sense of what she wants, and that at times, as a family, they really work to come up with things that work for everybody and accommodate everybody's needs and be attentive to each other's wants. And what she finds is that her daughter sometimes really feels challenged to compromise and has a lot of big feelings. And as the mom was describing it, it's hard for then the rest of the family too. They're wanting to be accommodating in some ways, and yet they're feeling challenged because they also are wanting things. And so the mom specifically, part of what her wants was she wanted to know how to get her daughter to understand compromise. And the mom was also wanting tools for herself. She really does her best to, really diligently work with her daughter and, step by step, like go along the way. And at some point, though, the mom talked about, she herself finds herself going into a reactive state, into her reptile brain. And so the mom was saying she would like to have some more tools to get out of her reptile brain, when that's where she ends up going. So those are her specific wants. So I want to respond to those in the way that I do. And so I'm going to talk about 3 specific things. First, I am going to talk about a typical experience of a young child. And so this may be very much describing what your child experiences. It may be a lot different. It may be a little bit different, but this is the typical experience of a young child. Then I'm going to talk, secondly, about the nature of compromise. What does that really mean? What is it? How might it be for anybody, but also specifically for a young child? And then the third thing I'm going to talk about are what are some options as a conscious parent? What are some things that we can do to, have those kind of situations turn out as beneficial as positive, help avoid, too much injury, not physical injury, of course, but, that sense of emotional injury and pain that we feel and our children feel in those really tough situations. So that's what I'm going to be talking about. I am going to pop over to Facebook just to see, though. I know there's those of you watching, so thank you very much, and I'm excited that you're here. And again, I will check in periodically for comments or questions. So let me talk first about what's a young child's experience. So when I'm saying young child, I'm talking about, they can be young school age, but let's say at least say 7 and younger, although there's relevance for older children as well, even all the way up into teenager age children. But a young child's experience in general is young children don't have a lot of autonomy. Now, I say that in relationship, say, to an adult, right? So again, this may be so much what your children experience, or your children may experience a variation of this. But in general, young children don't get to make a large number of everyday choices. So just to give a couple examples of that, they don't get to choose where to live. They don't get to choose, sort of their general schedule. They might have some flexibility in that, but they don't get to choose everything, like when to go to sleep, when to get up, whether or not to go to school, whether or not to do such and such for a family, vacation. They may not get to choose the types of food that are in the home. So again, there's just a whole variety of things that usually as adults, we don't tend to think of like, oh, I have this choice or not. Like I can choose to brush my teeth or not at night. Many parents, even though we may sometimes go, okay, whatever, don't brush your teeth, many parents may not give their child that choice on a regular basis. So that's the kind of life experience in general for a young child, is they don't get the full autonomy over themselves as adults do. So to me, that's really important to remember, because again, as adults, we forget that, especially the adults that I work with, conscious families who really strive to be mindful and think, well, how can I empower my child and how can I give choice to my child? So we forget that even though that is what we are choosing to do, there are still a number of instances when our children don't get choice and don't have that same sovereignty over themselves that we do. So I think that's an important place to start for us parents, is to go, oh yeah, they aren't as empowered as we are. The second thing is usually children do not get the final say-so. And I notice this even in my family. So again, my husband and I'm conscious moms coach, right? So I strive to be really conscious myself as a parent. And yet at one level, my husband and I both know we do have the final say. So if we're going in a back and forth with our daughter in terms of, well, what will we do today? Or what are we going to eat for dinner? At some level, we know that we are going to be the ones who ultimately make the decision. Are we going to stay at the park or are we going to go? We are ultimately in charge of that decision. So to me, again, there is this unconscious understanding from children and adults that even if there is a sense of appreciating and respecting our young children and giving them choice, that at some level or at some point in a process, there is going to be a decision made, and the holder of the power in that final decision is usually the adult. Now, I'm not saying that's wrong or right. I'm just simply saying that is, that's just the way it is. So again, that plays into how our children experience their daily life and how they feel in relationship, both to us and to others. The third thing I want to say about a child's typical experience is they have lots of emotions. And so they come up when some of these examples I've been giving are what happened to them. So when a child doesn't get a choice about something that they'd like to have a choice about, they have emotions about that. They have a physiological response. They have feelings like, oh, I feel sad, or I feel disappointed, or I'm angry, or I'm confused, so they have all these feelings coming up. And so that's happening all throughout their day, right? So it might be, oh, okay, it's Monday morning and it's time to go to school. And, they don't like school, or they're just not feeling that groove that day, whatever it is, so then that's the start of their day, right? So now they have emotions about that. And then they wanted to wear something, but that outfit isn't clean, or it's not available, oh, now I have emotions about this. And oh, then they remember that they have a play date that afternoon and they have emotions about that. So I'm not all talking about, quote, negative emotions. I'm talking about simply, hey, here's how I feel with this. Here's how I respond to this. Here's, how this feels to me right now. So they have these emotions all day long. And two things about it. One, for many young children, well, let me start with one piece first. For almost all young children, unless they're super exceptional or super different, they are still really early in their stages of learning how to manage their emotions and what to do when those feelings come up and what does it mean when those feelings come up. So they, unlike we adults, they don't have a lot of life experience to know, hey, when you feel sad, really, really sad in a moment, that's going to shift. You're not going to stay stuck there forever. They don't always know that, even if they have, shifted out of it before. It can feel really overwhelming to them. So like, oh no, I'm sad. It's never going to get better. So they're still in those early learning stages with emotions. The other piece for children is that they don't always, going back to autonomy, they don't always have the same flexibility in how they are allowed to express their emotions. And I did a Facebook Live about emotional expression yesterday. So if this is a topic that you are curious about, go back and watch that. I think it's on my personal feed, but anyway, you find it. So they don't always have that freedom to do whatever, or they don't have the tools. So as an adult, when I feel big emotions, or I'm aware that there's emotions I want to process that maybe I haven't, I can journal. I can go for a run. I can talk in a deep, vulnerable way with somebody I trust and love. I have things like that. I do things like EFT, tapping, which I did on my video yesterday. I have a lot of tools available that I can use to process those emotions. Young children don't have as many tools. And so they, sometimes get a little bit stuck too with their feelings, because now it's like, well, I don't have 25 ways to deal with this. I have one, and that's to express it. And if they're in a place, maybe they're at school, and the way they're inclined to express that emotion isn't allowed in school, or doesn't work in, with other people around, whatever it is, so they are experiencing these emotions all day long, and yet there often are limits on those emotions and how they're able to process them. So I share that all to say, basically, bottom line, at some level, many kids sort of are carrying around this residual bag of unprocessed experience that is there. And so it's there, and we adults do this too, frankly. But so then it's there unprocessed and is ready to woo, when things come up, that's sort of like the straw that broke the camel's back. Maybe when you approach a compromised situation with your child, it's the 27th thing that day that for them has been challenging. And so that may be all that they can take in that moment. So I wanted to offer that perspective because, again, I think we forget what it's like as a young child because we're not young children anymore. B, we, especially when we're conscious and mindful or strive to be that way, we often see, oh, well, here's all these things I do to support my child. And yet we forget they still are in some ways burdened by living in an adult world. And so it's valuable for us to remember, hey, you know what? They're really trying, and it can be really hard as a little person in a big person's world. So I think these are valuable reminders for all of us to have that awareness of what's it like in their shoes, okay? So let me pause. I just see some stuff over on Facebook. All right, awesome. Thank you for likes, and thanks for sharing. Those of you who've done that, I appreciate that. All right, so the second point that I want to talk about and make is about compromise, right? So I looked it up because I have my own ideas, right? But I wanted to look up and see, what does the internet say about compromise, right? That's our go-to default definer and answer giver. So here's the two top definitions. The first one is settlement of a dispute reached by each side making concessions. Okay, so I want to say a couple things about that. So the two words that I really clued in on that definition were dispute and concessions. So what I was thinking of, going back again to what's our child's potential perspective here, is, here we are, and this, going back to this mom's question, this was family compromise, right? This was about compromise within a family. So here we are as a young child in a family, and these are people who love us, and all of a sudden they want X and we want Y. And so that's a dispute, right? There's a difference. There's a difference in opinion. There's a difference in wants, maybe a difference in needs. And so at some level, simply that idea that mom doesn't want the same thing that I want can provoke feelings, right? The child might feel sad about that. They might be disappointed. They might have some fear about, oh no, what does that mean? So even that idea that, wait, somebody in my family doesn't agree with me, that in and of itself can provoke some of those emotions, right? Then when we look at the rest of that definition, it says the settlement of a dispute reached by each side making concessions. So concessions, again, what does that mean? We've given up, right? We concede. So I want A plus B plus C, and you want X plus Y plus Z. Well, maybe in the compromise, I am conceding B, but I'm going to ask for A and C. I'm going to concede B, but I want A and C. And maybe you're willing to concede Z, so there's this sense of like, okay, first of all, from a young child's standpoint, they don't maybe even realize this art of compromise, right? From my perspective, thinking about it, and this is an interesting one for me because I'm a recovering people pleaser and recovering perfectionist. And so for me, an old default for compromise really would be concession. Those would be the synonyms, like compromise equals concession. Because part of my old default behavior was, when I realized that somebody important to me, namely a parent usually, but sometimes it was a friend or a teacher, when somebody important to me wanted something that was not what I wanted, one of the, I'm losing the word here, one of the ways I figured that out, so to speak, was, oh, well, if I give up what I want, then they will be happy. That's a people pleaser, right? It's sort of the definition of people pleaser. So my old default was, when you find out somebody wants something different than you, give up what you want, give them what they want, keep them happy so they will like you and want to stay in relationship with you. So that's some of my internal old learning that still comes up when compromise situations happen. So we bring that to the situations with our children. We bring our life history with us. But when you just think about that in terms of a child who doesn't have a lot of life history yet, at least in this life, they don't really even know what does it mean? How do I know what I want to give up? How do I really know for myself what is my deepest want in this moment? How do I know if this is something that I am willing to give up even? So they have this whole innocence and inexperience level about this idea of what is this relationship negotiation that we're doing. And so I think that is also helpful to remember, they don't really know either. So it's like they almost need like a coach there with them to sort of, so how do you know which thing you're willing to pass up on right now? How do you know when to really advocate for yourself? How do you know how to advocate for yourself and speak up in a way that other people can hear, or that other people can say, yeah, I want that too? That takes most of us, I was going to say years, but for me, I'm 45, I'm going to be 46 next week. I am still learning that because I'm unlearning stuff. And so I'm still learning, how do I navigate that in a way that is respectful to me and also respectful to others? So to expect that as an adult, when I don't even fully have those skills in each moment, to expect that our children are young children in particular, are going to be able to navigate that, I think is unfair expectation. Because if I can't do it, not that technically there's young children who can do a lot of things better than me because they're, closer to source. However, what I'm saying is, if I, as an adult with a lot of life experience, am challenged by compromise, then I think it's reasonable to anticipate that compromise, simply by its nature, is going to be challenging for our children. So the second definition I want to share with you, because I think this is another really interesting one. Second definition of compromise is, quote, to accept standards that are lower than desirable. I thought this was a great one because I went, ooh, compromise, So for me personally, one of the things that as a parent I am really striving to do and support my daughter in is for her to be very, very clear on her authentic self, to know who she is, to know what she stands for, to know what she's about, and to co-create relationships in her life where she is completely respected and loved and honored for who she is. And so part of that, to me, means to not settle, to not say, oh, well, I guess that's good enough for me. And I don't mean that in a selfish kind of way, like more, I want more. I do mean it, though, in a way of really honoring, it makes me sit up straight, right? I have to readjust my posture here. Really honoring that she is a sacred, sovereign spirit, and she is worthy of the best. Now, that's also true of the people she's interacting with, right? So it's not I'm better than, it's, oh yeah, that's you over there too. You are a sacred, sovereign being worthy of the best. And so to me, this idea of to accept standards that are lower than desirable, personally, is a little bit of sort of an undercut of that. It's like, oh, well, you should just deal with it. And I think, frankly, that's the old parenting paradigm. And you hear that sort of in old parenting language, like, get over it, kid. Life isn't fair. So it's this idea of really, rather than honoring, gee, that is really important to you. And, it's yes and. It's an idea from improv, right? So it's yes, this is true. And this other piece is also true right now. Yes, this is important to you. And we've got 4 people to accommodate right now. And we want everybody to have that sense of being upheld and honored. Versus the old parenting paradigm is get over it, kid. Stop your crying. The life ain't fair. That, to me, is a complete affront to the dignity of our children when we do that. It's saying, life ain't fair. Well, yeah, life ain't fair. True in one sense, right? But when we do it that way, we really are basically undercutting our children as those sovereign beings and saying, you just need to suck it up. So I think for me as a conscious parent, that definition of compromise was really illuminating. It was like, yeah, how can I do both and? How can I support my daughter where she is and also help her see that, yes, and maybe in the moment, also I have needs and wants, or your friend has wants and needs, So I thought that definition was really interesting. So let me pause for just a second. I'm just full of pause, right? And feel free, folks. I know you're out there watching, so thank you, but feel free if you have questions or comments. All right. So here's a couple more things I want to say about compromise, is that the other thing I think to remember is that in a parent-child relationship, even with conscious parents, it is an unequal relationship. It is, although I think we are spiritual equals, the fact is that parents are in the power position in that relationship. They do get to call the shots. They do have the resources. They have the keys to the car, whatever it is. So it's an unequal relationship. And if you look at or think about compromise in an unequal relationship, it's different, right? So does that person in the subordinate role, just to use easy language to understand, does that person in the subordinate role, in this case the child, really have power to say no, or I don't care what you want, I want what I want? Do they really have, in the end, do they wield power that they can access and use? Or is it a relationship where at some level, no matter what they do or say, the mom, dad, aunt, uncle, the adult has the power? So I think, again, that's a valuable thing to remember, that, oh, you know what? There is an unequal distribution of power here. So I think that's valuable to keep in our minds. So I share all of this about our children's experience, the typical young child's experience, and these ideas around compromise, basically to boil it down to, in the moment, right? So now we're in the nitty gritty. We have this dispute, this difference. I think the most important thing to remember is that in that moment, then, here's what's likely to be in play. You have a child who has really big emotions. And when they have those really big emotions, and we know this from interpersonal neurobiology and other research, when they have those big emotions, their most human brain, their prefrontal cortex, is not usually in control, right? As Dan Siegel says, they flip their lid, and so now they're either in their limbic brain or they're in their reptile brain. And we know that those brains, as wonderful as they are and as valuable a work as they do, their work is not the work of problem solving. It's not the work of compromise. It doesn't have that flexibility. The reptile brain it's not flexible. It is about save your butt from sudden, and imminent death. So that's a valuable tool, but it is definitely not a good tool to bring to the table of compromise, right? That's not a compromising brain. That's a brain that is not interested in compromise. And so our children don't have that rationality. They don't have a lot of tools to be able to bring to the literal compromise table. Speaking of child, there's a child.
How are you?
Oh, thank you. Money and rocks. Thank you. A rock. My daughter's a big rock head. And a dime. Woohoo! So again, just thinking about, okay, so here we are, and all of a sudden we have a child who, they're young already, so they haven't developed a lot of this prefrontal cortex anyway. That's not fully online till our mid-20s. At least that's what research now shows. So they don't even have all this in. Maybe they have this, right? Like they only have half a prefrontal cortex anyway. And now it's offline. And so they don't have that. And so I say all this to say to the mom who asked this original question about how do I help my daughter understand compromise? So one thing I would say is don't try and get her to understand compromise in the moment, because she won't. Oh, I have a pause. So hold on. It's a weird thing. I'm just telling my daughter that our mail carrier is driving around the block because we have a gift for him. So hold on just a second. So I say all that to say, basically, again, that in that moment, for a young child to understand compromise and really be in a frame of mind to be able to really want to compromise and be okay with it is a pretty Herculean task. So that's my one thing, is don't expect them to understand it in the moment, okay? Don't do that, because that will be an exercise in futility for you and them both. So that's what I'd say, is don't try and get them to understand, is understand compromise in the moment. But let's get to in the moment, because that's what this mom was also wanting to know, was how do I, as the parent, get out of reptile brain so that I'm not unloading or doing things from that self-protection place that are harmful or hurtful to my daughter, both in the moment and in that long term. This mom was talking about, she wants to honor her daughter's strength of will and her, inner gutsiness. So let's talk about what are some of our options in that moment. So the first thing I want to say, it's a little actually before the moment, is anticipate some resistance. So I talk about this this idea really fully actually in a course of mine that's going to be starting in early January. It's this idea that when we anticipate in a positive way, not in a resigned, oh crap, this is going to happen type of way. When we anticipate that, yeah, it's going to be natural for, at one level, our child to not want to compromise, to resist, trading pieces with us to come up with a mutually satisfying solution. That's one thing we can do in the moment or ahead of time, so that our expectations are lowered and we're like, yeah, it's going to be likely that they are going to push back on this some. That helps us come into the game calmer and with more reserves, rather than already being pissed off right at the outset because, what do you mean you don't want to compromise? That's not going to serve them or serve us. So in the moment, anticipate some resistance. Second, and I'm not going to go into the hows with all of these. If you want to do hows, set up a session with me and I will work with you on how you can specifically do it, because everybody's different. But the second thing you want to do is keep yourself calm. And this goes back to the brain states. When we are calm, we are like that rock for our children. They feed off of us, first of all. So if we're not calm, they're not going to be as calm. The other thing is when they are not calm, they're feeling that agitation and they're feeling those big feelings. When we are calm, that helps them re-regulate, helps them get back to that human brain, helps their human brain come back online. So we want to keep ourselves as calm as possible, which I know this mom does and works on. The third thing we want to do, this goes back to the don't expect your child to understand compromise in the moment, is empathize. You want to save the teaching for later. You don't want to teach and explain now or say, well, you give a little bit of yours and I'll give a little. You can do a teeny bit of that, but basically what you want to do is empathize. Yeah, this isn't fun. It would be really, really cool if we could be exactly the way you wanted right now. Yeah, I totally get that. I get this doesn't feel fair. I get that this is really frustrating. I get that, you don't like it. So it's that really validating that their experience is true. Even if you disagree with them, it's not about your agreeing, it's your agreeing that their experience is what their experience is. That's, to me, the nutshell of empathy. It's like, yeah, I get that that's how it is for you. And I have a tender heart about that. I get it. I feel it. The fourth thing that I think is really important, and I often forget this myself, and I get to okay, so what is important? So the fourth thing is to know what's important. I know as a parent, I come into situations sometimes and I'm like, I give some examples. So with eating after dinner. So if my daughter, whether she's eaten a lot at dinner or not, no matter sort of what leads into that, after dinner, if she's wanting some food, there's a part of me that's like, no, nope. We already had dinner, blah, blah, blah. That's some of my old programming. Sometimes it's some of my wants too. It's like, oh, I don't want to be in the kitchen longer or whatever. So I can get really stuck and be like, okay, no, I have to make sure she understands that we eat at dinner and we're not going to make special things, and we're not, whatever my inner dialogue about all these things I need her to know and understand are. it's valuable as parents in that moment to really pause and check in with ourselves and go, okay, what is important here? And to me, there's no universal answer. I'm not telling you what is important because I don't know what's important to you. What I do know is that often we, as human beings, we get off track because of what goes on up here. Our minds make up stories and we get sort of seduced by, oh, this idea, I've got to make sure she understands this. Or, from our own wounds of our own past, for example, we might have this thought, and often it would be an unconscious, or almost always it would be unconscious. I have to make sure she doesn't take advantage of me. That could be from our own past of having this sense, like me, going back to my people-pleasing background, right? So when my habit was, or sometimes still falls into people-pleasing, that's me saying, oh, person wants X, I want Y, well, I'll just give up what I want and go for what they want. And so at some level, when I'm doing that, I personally am giving up on myself. And so I can definitely have that inner dialogue then that says, well, you better make sure then other people don't take advantage of you. Because you can see the flip side, right? When I give up myself, my perception can be that other people are taking advantage of me. So if that's the mindset I'm getting stuck in when my daughter comes to me after dinner and says, I'm really hungry or I want something else. If what I'm hearing is, don't let people take advantage of you, don't let people take advantage of you, the lens through which I'm going to perceive my daughter's request is that she is trying to take advantage of me. And so if that's the spin I put on her request, then, sorry, I'm getting distracted by the mail carriers outside and they're delivering our Christmas gift to him. So, but if that's where I'm stuck and that's how I'm perceiving her request, can you see how it would be very easy for me in my reaction to her to then come from this place of, no, you can't have that. No, you've got to do it yourself. No, I told you already, we're not going to do that. Because rather than pausing and going, okay, what's important in this moment? What really, really is important? And me finding the truth in that moment, I'm reacting from a place that is so not in the moment. It's from my past, it's from my history. And so I'm not present with what's really going on. And I think my own personal experience and with the parents I coach and the families I work with, that is a really common thing that happens for us. And so we, in that place, we tend, as the adults, we tend to get really rigid. And again, rigid is not a good place for compromise. So we tend to get really hard, inflexible, and we start to really clamp down. We're losing our flexibility that resides in the prefrontal cortex, and we're getting more and more restrictive in what we have the capacity to do. So the advice then is to really take a pause in those moments and really check in. What is important? And find your truth in that moment. Not what you think should be important, not what some coach told you should be important, not what your parents told you, not what you read on some blog. It's what is important to you in that moment. And it's going to be different each time, most likely. But so really check in that moment, what is important right now? And gain some tools, work with somebody who can help you learn to discern what are your true thoughts versus what are demands and limiting beliefs that you have going on. All right, so that's in the moment. Those are some of my tips for the in the moment, what you can do when your child is having a hard time compromising. The last thing I want to share are what you can do, not in those moments, not in the nitty-gritty moments, but outside of those moments. Because to me, when I say set aside the teaching from those, stressful in the moment places, you still want to do that. You still do, and especially this mom, she said, so what can I do to help my daughter understand compromise? So you want to have some ways to do that, and you want to do that outside of the moment. So that's what I'm going to share as we finish up this video. So there's lots of different ideas. I wanted to share about 4 or so with you, and not in any particular order. One of the things I think is really, really useful, both as a parent and for your child, him or herself, are power reversal games. So this goes back to the very beginning of this video where I talked about a young child's typical experience is they don't have as much autonomy as we do. They don't have as much sovereignty. So take that off my ear. My ear is hurting. So play those power reversal games with them so that they literally get to be the one calling the shots. They get to be the one saying, here's what we're going to do now. Here's what you're going to do now. And part of that is really about re-empowering them and reminding them, yes, they have a voice, and giving them that literal experience of being the one saying, yes, we can do this. No, we can't. You can even play an old-fashioned game like Mother May I, and just reverse the roles. Your child is the mother or the father. Father, may I? And you pretend to be the child. And let them say, yes, you may, or no, you may not. And that right there is something that is really useful for them. So give them those opportunities. Reverse roles, reverse the power play, the power structure in the relationship. A second thing, another type of playing that you can do that supports you and your children is to role play. And role play would be similar to power reversal, but play those situations in which compromise might come up. So maybe you play with some stuffed animals or some dolls or some toys. Okay, let's play, friends at a park, whatever, or let's play school. And so you have the characters do different things, and so you can play those situations of compromise. And 2 things that role playing is really helpful for is, one, my favorite, is that it lets you see your child's perception of the situation. It lets you see how they perceive, each character, right? So they see the person wanting the compromise to happen. How do they see that? If you're doing, if they're playing the adult, you may even hear them language what you typically say, and it may surprise you. You might be like, ooh, do I really say that? Or is that the way I sound when I say that? So it gives you that purview into their world. So I think that's one of my favorite things with role play is, like, rather than asking direct questions, you're playing and you're finding out, what is your child experience? What is it like for them? The other benefit of role play is that, you can work out different skills there. So, depending on what's going on in the role play, if your child is playing like the child and maybe they're, stamping their feet and they're really mad about having to do a compromise, maybe you have one other character who, gets angry with them, and then you have another character who attempts to problem solve with them, and so you can go, okay, well, let's try this. Let's use a big voice and a bold stance, whatever, but you really get to play with those things with them. So role playing is really valuable for actually helping them gain those skills and gain those abilities to understand, what does it mean to compromise? What can they do? How can they get their voice heard? How can they make the space to hear others? All kinds of things like that. So that's role play with some benefits. A third game, I'm into games and wanted to share a few of them. This is from my experience taking improv classes, and one of the games that our teacher had us play was 2 no's and a yes. So the theory or the idea behind this game is that you can say no to 2 things if you're doing it, oops, sorry about that, if you're doing it as a partnership. When partner A says, well, let's play checkers, you can say no, and then they say, well, let's bake a cake. You can say no, but then you've used up your 2 no's. So you then have to, by the rules of the game, you have to say yes to the next offer that your partner makes. And what part of this game does is help you to really check in and be like, okay, I may not really want to do this thing. I may not really, I totally forgot, play checkers. I may not really want to play checkers, but I don't know. I don't think I want to use up one of my no's saying no to this. So I'll say yes. And so then you're like, okay, yes, I still have my 2 no's in my pocket that I can say. So it is a game that can help your child learn to check in and say, yeah, what is my level of resistance to this? It's not my top thing, but given several other options, it sounds okay. So it's a good way to teach that self-reflectiveness and to say, yeah, what do I want to say yes to? What do I want to say no to? And it can work for you as an adult too, because again, we do it. Sometimes we just automatically say yes or no. And it's like, oh, if we're playing it and go, okay, I can say no to this, but what if my child asked me to play Twister and I really, really, really hate Twister? I want to be able to have a no to say no to Twister, whatever it is. So it's good for us as adults as well. So I don't know, that was 3. Okay, 3, that was 3 things, right? The 4th thing, it's not a game, although you can treat it as a game, you have fun with it. I think, though, it's really, really valuable, going back to some of the things I said about our own life experience, is to examine our own fears and concerns around compromise. So I gave examples. I've already given a lot of examples for myself. But again, as a recovering people pleaser, sometimes I can, if I'm not conscious, I can fall into that thing of thinking, oh crap, if I don't take charge and I don't get to have my say now, then people are going to run roughshod over me. So if that's a latent fear that I've got, excuse me, if that's a latent fear that I've got, it is going to be there ready to get poked on when I get into these compromise situations with my daughter or with my husband or, with whomever, the person I'm merging into the highway with, right? So that is so valuable for us. And so I advise this mom, I would say, do that piece for yourself too and see what else comes up for you around compromise. What do you think it means? You mentioned something about concern about your other child. And so your other child sort of getting the unfair end of the deal, right? So look at that and be aware that that unconscious fear is feeding into, maybe not every time, but definitely many times is going to be feeding into that situation. And so there is going to be a level of, what am I trying to say? There's going to be a level of sort of machinations that you put yourself through because part of your mind is like, oh my gosh, I can't let my other child feel put upon, or that that the sister always gets her way. So then, you're like just getting really, really tangled up. So if you know that going in, that that's one of your fears and concerns, it's easier to address it. It's like even easier to talk to your other child and say, you know what? This is something that I notice comes up for me. Is that true for you? You can check in with them, as simple as that. You can say, does that happen for you? Yeah, it does. Okay, well then you talk, well, what would you like me to do in those situations? Doesn't say you have to do it, but you get their feedback. Maybe they don't really care that the younger one gets their way more times because they understand, they're the younger one. It's harder for them, whatever. But, check in with those other people based on what you learn. So in a nutshell, again, go back to examine what are your own concerns and fears around compromise. The other thing I'll say about that, just as a, probably won't be short because most things I don't say short, but, look at it in different situations too. Like it may be that you deal with compromise one way when you're with your children by yourself. When your spouse is there, you do it a different way. or you tend to have different behaviors. You might do it an entirely different way when you're out in public versus when you're at home. So all of those to me are indications that we are not, it's like we are adjusting ourselves. And I'm not saying that's bad, it's simply something to be aware of. Like, okay, so what happens when we're out in public? Do we maybe then compromise faster because we're like, oh crap, I just don't want my kid to yell and scream and, look like a nutcase. Whatever goes on in our head, it's like, oh, be aware that, yeah, we have some of that comes up when we're out in public. Or, oh, gee, when I'm with my spouse, my spouse tends to be the one who will say yes, yes, yes to my child. And so I sort of take I have to be the one who teaches them that the world is a tough place. Maybe that's the way you do it. Maybe it's reversed in your family. But I think that's I think that's a really important piece for you, this mom, and for all of us as parents to check in and say, yeah, what comes up for me? What are my concerns around compromise, and what may feed into this being a challenging situation for me? So those are the things I wanted to share. Let me just check in. Thank you for thumbs up and some love. So if you have some comments or questions, I am going to be getting ready to sign off and going back to other things. So if you have some comments or questions, now is a good time to post those if you want me to respond live. So again, to me, there's no have to way to do this. There's no right way to do this. There's simply some awareness that I think benefits us all to really understand what is a young child's typical experience. Second, to look at what does compromise mean, and how or what might it mean to our young children, even more than just these general ideas. What might it mean to them? What might be some of their fears or concerns or challenges with compromise? And then third is looking at those options. What can we do in the moment? What can we do outside of the moment to have it be as neutral an experience each time? And it's not going to be every time, but as many times as possible to have it be more of a neutral experience that doesn't have added on complications or results that we don't want. So that is me, again, talking about when our young children won't compromise. What do we do? What does it mean? And if you have questions or comments, feel free to leave those and I can respond to them later. My name is Shonnie Lavender. I am the Conscious Moms Coach. You can find me here on Facebook most Thursdays about this time. And you can find me lots of other places. If you want to know where some of those other places are, go back and watch the beginning of the video. But please feel free, if you'd like to engage more in conversations like this or be in a community where these are the kind of conversations we have with each other, please seek me out here on Facebook in the Conscious Moms Circle. So I wish you all a wonderful day. Again, I'm Shonnie Lavender, and thank you for spending this time with me today. Take care.